From the sands of the Nile, where the first civilizations flourished, to the towering pyramids and golden treasures that have captivated the world for millennia. This is the story of ancient Egypt. But what lies beyond the myths and mysteries? Who were the pharaohs who ruled with divine authority? And how did their empire rise to become one of the greatest in human history? In this documentary, we're diving deep into the entire history of Egypt, from the dawn of the first dynasties to the glories of the New Kingdom, where Egypt's power stretched across continents. We'll explore the monumental achievements of the Old Kingdom, the cultural rebirth of the Middle Kingdom, and the imperial conquests of the New Kingdom. Through military triumphs, religious revolutions, and unmatched architectural marvels, the story of Egypt is one of endurance, innovation, and glory. Get ready to journey through time and uncover the truths behind the legends. This is the entire history of Egypt, an epic tale of one of the world's oldest and most influential civilizations. Let's begin. The pre-dynastic period, Egypt before the pharaohs. The history of Egypt stretches back tens of thousands of years. Long before the first pharaoh, Egypt was inhabited by people who lived along the Nile River. The Nile, flowing from south to north, would later become the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization, but its significance began much earlier. Around 10,000 BCE, at the end of the last ice age, the climate of Egypt began to change. What was once a semi-arid land became more habitable, and the lush banks of the Nile River supported the growth of plant and animal life. Over time, early human communities began to settle in this fertile region, creating the foundations of what would become one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. These early Egyptians, who lived in small, tribal groups, were primarily hunter-gatherers. However, around 6000 BCE, people began to experiment with agriculture, cultivating crops such as wheat, barley, and flax. Domesticated animals like cattle, sheep, and goats also became a key part of life. These advances marked a significant shift from a nomadic lifestyle to a more settled existence. The rise of villages and chiefdoms. By 4000 BCE, Egypt's early settlers began to form more structured communities along the Nile. These settlements grew into small villages, each with its own distinct culture, beliefs, and social organization. However, the unity that would come to define Egypt was still a distant prospect. Instead, Egypt was divided into various regions, each ruled by local leaders. These villages eventually developed into chiefdoms, led by powerful chieftains who ruled over larger territories. The regions of Upper Egypt, which lay to the south, and Lower Egypt to the north, began to develop their own distinct identities. In Upper Egypt, the culture was more focused on the worship of gods associated with the natural world, while Lower Egypt had a more cosmopolitan outlook, influenced by trade and contact with neighboring peoples. At this point, Egypt's future was shaped by the gradual emergence of complex social structures. Religious beliefs, which had always played an important role in Egyptian life, began to evolve into organized systems that revolved around gods and the afterlife. In particular, the belief in a divine king who ruled in the favor of the gods began to take root, laying the groundwork for the pharaohs. The unification of Egypt, the birth of a nation. By around 3100 BCE, Egypt was on the verge of becoming a unified kingdom. During this time, two powerful figures emerged who would change the course of Egypt's history forever. These figures were the leaders of Upper and Lower Egypt, and their story marks the dawn of the Pharaonic era. The first of these leaders, King Narmer, often identified with the legendary Menes, is credited with uniting Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom. Narmer's name is found on an artifact known as the Narmer Palette, a ceremonial stone that depicts the king wearing the crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt. The palette also shows Narmer smiting his enemies, symbolizing the consolidation of power and the establishment of a single, unified Egypt. Narmer's unification of Egypt was a monumental achievement. It marked the beginning of the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BCE, during which Egypt would establish its first true dynasties and its identity as a cohesive nation-state. Narmer's reign set the stage for the development of Egypt's royal institutions, including the concept of the pharaoh as a divine ruler, and laid the groundwork for the creation of Egypt's monumental architecture, its complex bureaucracy, and its vast wealth. The early dynastic period, foundations of the pharaonic system. The early dynastic period is a time of consolidation and growth for Egypt. Following the unification, Egypt was divided into two regions: Upper Egypt, located to the south, and Lower Egypt, located in the north. The capital of Egypt was initially established at Memphis, near the apex of the Nile Delta. Memphis would remain the political and cultural heart of Egypt for centuries, and its proximity to both Upper and Lower Egypt made it a strategic and symbolic center. During the early dynastic period, Egypt's political structure became more formalized. The role of the pharaoh, previously a local ruler, was elevated to a national position, and the king was seen as both a political and religious leader. The pharaoh was considered to be the living representative of the gods on earth, an intermediary between the divine and the mortal realms. At this time, the Egyptian kingdom was also organized into a series of provinces, known as nomes. Each nome was ruled by a governor, who was often a member of the royal family or an appointed official. These nomes served as administrative units, and their governors played an important role in maintaining order and overseeing trade and agricultural production. The early pharaohs also began to construct elaborate tombs to secure their place in the afterlife. The earliest royal tombs were built in the form of mastabas, flat-roofed structures made of mud brick or stone. These tombs were intended to serve as eternal homes for the pharaohs and their families. They were filled with offerings, food, and goods to ensure that the deceased would have everything needed for the journey to the afterlife. The emergence of writing, the dawn of Egyptian civilization. One of the most significant achievements of the early dynastic period was the development of hieroglyphic writing. This system of symbols, which would later become one of the most sophisticated writing systems of the ancient world, allowed the Egyptians to record their history, religious texts, and royal decrees. Hieroglyphs were primarily used for monumental inscriptions on tombs, temples, and statues, but they also found use in administrative documents, such as lists of goods, taxes, and other state affairs. The ability to write allowed the pharaohs and their officials to communicate more efficiently, thereby strengthening the centralization of the state. Egypt's early writing system also had a religious dimension. Many of the hieroglyphs depicted gods, animals, and symbols that had sacred meanings. This connection between writing and the divine helped to solidify the idea of the pharaoh's divine authority, as kings were depicted as direct descendants of the gods, capable of interpreting their will through written symbols. The rise of the Old Kingdom, dynasties, and centralization. Following the early dynastic period, Egypt's rulers sought to build upon the foundations laid by King Narmer. The first few pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, such as Djoser, began to establish Egypt as a powerful centralized state. The king's authority was bolstered by his divine status, and over time, the role of the pharaoh evolved into the supreme ruler of not just the kingdom, but also of the entire cosmos. The establishment of the Old Kingdom was characterized by the strengthening of royal power and the centralization of administration. Pharaohs began to exert greater control over Egypt's regions, particularly through the use of provincial governors, who reported directly to the king. These governors helped maintain order and secure the stability of the kingdom, while the king retained control over key resources, such as land and grain. The economic stability of Egypt during the Old Kingdom was largely due to the fertility of the Nile Valley. With the Nile's annual flooding providing rich soil for agriculture, the economy thrived. Large-scale agricultural projects, such as the construction of irrigation systems, helped sustain Egypt's growing population. The pyramid builders, Djoser and the Step Pyramid. While the Old Kingdom was defined by the rise of centralized power, it was also marked by some of the most iconic and enduring symbols of ancient Egypt, the pyramids. These colossal structures were not simply tombs. They were a reflection of the divine nature of the pharaohs and their belief in the afterlife. The first monumental step toward the creation of the pyramids was taken during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, who ruled from 2670 BCE to 2640 BCE. Djoser's architect, Imhotep, is credited with designing the first step pyramid at Saqqara, a monumental structure that would forever change the face of Egyptian architecture. The step pyramid was the precursor to the smooth-sided pyramids that would follow, but its construction represented a bold leap forward in the ambition of Egyptian builders. The pyramid at Saqqara was constructed as a burial place for Pharaoh Djoser. It was made up of 6 steps, each one smaller than the one below it, and was built using limestone. The step pyramid represented not just the king's final resting place, but also his journey into the afterlife, where he would be reborn and join the gods in eternal existence. The development of monumental architecture would become a hallmark of the Old Kingdom, as future pharaohs sought to outdo one another in building grander and more elaborate tombs. The Great Pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The pinnacle of pyramid building came during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, who ruled from around 2589 BCE to 2566 BCE. It was under Khufu that the largest and most famous of all pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was constructed. Standing at 481 feet, 146 meters, tall, this pyramid was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Khufu's Great Pyramid, built as a tomb for the pharaoh, required the labor of thousands of workers and was a marvel of ancient engineering. It is believed that the pyramid was originally covered with smooth white limestone, which would have made it shine brightly in the Egyptian sun. Over time, most of this outer casing was removed, but the Great Pyramid remains a testament to the skill and determination of the ancient Egyptians. Following Khufu's reign, his successors, including his son Khafre, continued the work of constructing grand burial tombs. Khafre, who ruled from 2558 BCE to 2532 BCE, built a pyramid at Giza that was slightly smaller than Khufu's, but still an imposing structure. His pyramid is distinguished by the nearby Great Sphinx of Giza, a colossal statue with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, believed to represent Khafre himself. The final pyramid at Giza was built by Menkaure, who ruled from around 2532 BCE to 2503 BCE. Menkaure's pyramid is the smallest of the 3, but it still stands as an impressive example of Egyptian engineering and grandeur. Together, the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure form one of the most iconic archaeological sites in the world. The pyramids at Giza were not just tombs. They were expressions of the divine power of the pharaohs. These structures were meant to serve as eternal resting places for the kings, ensuring that they would continue to rule in the afterlife. The belief in an eternal afterlife was central to Egyptian religion, and the pyramids reflected this vision of immortality. Society and culture during the Old Kingdom. While the pyramids and the reigns of the great pharaohs were the most visible aspects of the Old Kingdom, the society and culture of Egypt were just as remarkable. The Old Kingdom saw the development of a rigid social hierarchy, with the pharaoh at the top, followed by a class of nobles, priests, and officials who helped run the state. At the bottom of the social pyramid were the farmers, artisans, and laborers who formed the backbone of Egyptian society. These workers were responsible for producing the goods and services that sustained the kingdom, including food, textiles, and, of course, the construction of the pyramids. The Old Kingdom was also a period of great cultural achievement. Egyptian art and sculpture flourished during this time, and the iconic, formalized style that would define Egyptian art for centuries was established. Egyptian tombs were filled with elaborate paintings, carvings, and statues depicting the deceased, and the gods they would encounter in the afterlife. In terms of religion, the Old Kingdom was characterized by the belief in the sun god Ra as the supreme deity. The pharaoh, as the divine ruler, was believed to be the earthly representative of Ra, and his power was directly linked to the sun's life-giving energy. The king's relationship with the gods was central to his rule, and his actions were seen as fulfilling divine will. The decline of the Old Kingdom. Despite the immense achievements of the Old Kingdom, the period came to an end around 2181 BCE. The cause of this decline is still debated by scholars, but a combination of factors likely contributed. These included internal political instability, a breakdown in the power of the pharaohs, and a series of weak rulers who failed to maintain control over the country. Additionally, environmental factors such as a drop in the Nile's flooding, which led to crop failures and famine, may have further destabilized Egypt. As central authority weakened, the power of provincial governors and local rulers grew, leading to a fragmentation of Egypt into competing regions. By the end of the Old Kingdom, Egypt entered a period known as the First Intermediate Period, marked by a decline in centralized power and an increase in social unrest. But even in the face of these challenges, the legacy of the Old Kingdom, its monumental pyramids, its culture, and its religious beliefs, remained a powerful influence on the civilization for centuries to come. The Middle Kingdom, which lasted from around 2055 BCE to 1650 BCE, is often regarded as a golden age in Egyptian history. This period saw the reunification of Egypt, the flourishing of the arts and literature, and military expansion. Though the grandeur of the pyramids would not be recreated, this era brought a renaissance of culture, religion, and governance. The reunification of Egypt, the rise of Mentuhotep II. The First Intermediate Period had left Egypt in a fractured state, with competing dynasties vying for control. But the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt was not a distant dream. It was realized under the leadership of one of Egypt's most capable pharaohs, Mentuhotep II. Mentuhotep II, who ruled from around 2061 BCE to 2010 BCE, emerged as the savior of Egypt, restoring order to a divided nation. By defeating the local rulers and re-establishing central authority, he effectively ended the First Intermediate Period and ushered in the Middle Kingdom. His reign marked the beginning of the 11th dynasty, a new period of stability. Mentuhotep II's achievement of reunification was not just political. It was symbolic. His rule helped restore confidence in the pharaoh's divine authority, the role of Egypt's gods, and the traditional practices that had flourished during the Old Kingdom. Under his leadership, Egypt was able to regain its prosperity and reunite its people, setting the stage for the flourishing of culture and the arts that would define the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom, a cultural renaissance. The Middle Kingdom is often considered the time of Egypt's golden age in terms of culture, literature, and artistic achievement. Although Egypt did not continue the monumental pyramid-building tradition, it experienced a renaissance in other forms, including literature, sculpture, and architecture. One of the greatest achievements of this era was the creation of Egyptian literature, much of which has survived in fragments. Texts such as the Instructions of Ptahhotep and the Story of Sinuhe provide us with valuable insight into Egyptian thought, values, and everyday life. The Story of Sinuhe, in particular, is one of the most famous pieces of Egyptian literature. This narrative, written in the first person, recounts the life of a court official who flees Egypt after the death of the pharaoh, only to later return and be forgiven. It speaks of loyalty, honor, and the complex relationship between the pharaoh and his people. Sculpture during this time also flourished. The Middle Kingdom saw a return to a more naturalistic style of art, a departure from the more rigid and formalized depictions of earlier periods. Statues and reliefs began to portray not only pharaohs but also private individuals in more realistic and lifelike ways, showing a greater attention to detail. Architecturally, the Middle Kingdom saw the construction of grand temples and tombs, as well as the expansion of existing sites. The pyramids of the Middle Kingdom were smaller than those of the Old Kingdom, but still served as symbols of the pharaoh's divine power. The most famous Middle Kingdom pyramid is that of Amenemhat II at Dahshur, which, although less grand than the Great Pyramid, was still an impressive feat of engineering. Expansion and military campaigns, Egypt's reach beyond the Nile. The Middle Kingdom was not just a time of cultural revival, it was also a period of military expansion. Pharaohs like Amenemhat I, who ruled from around 1991 BCE to 1962 BCE, and his son Senusret I sought to extend Egypt's power beyond its borders, creating an empire that would rival those of other great ancient civilizations. One of the key targets for expansion was Nubia, the region to the south of Egypt, which was rich in resources such as gold and precious stones. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom launched military campaigns to subdue the Nubian kingdoms, solidifying Egypt's control over these valuable lands. These conquests not only brought wealth and resources to Egypt but also expanded its influence in the region. In addition to Nubia, Egypt also began to focus on the Sinai Peninsula and parts of the Levant. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs established military garrisons in these areas to secure Egypt's borders and protect trade routes. The result was a period of prosperity, with Egypt benefiting from increased trade, tribute, and wealth from its conquered territories. The military campaigns of the Middle Kingdom were not only about expansion but also about securing Egypt's place in the ancient world. The pharaohs sought to ensure that Egypt would remain a dominant power, both militarily and economically. Their successes on the battlefield were celebrated in inscriptions and monuments, reinforcing the idea of the pharaoh as a divine ruler, capable of leading his people to victory. Religious and social life in the Middle Kingdom. Religion continued to play a central role in Egyptian life during the Middle Kingdom. The pharaoh was still regarded as a god on earth, and his actions were seen as a reflection of the divine will. However, during this period, there was a shift toward a more personal and accessible relationship with the gods. The Middle Kingdom saw the rise of the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and rituals designed to guide the deceased through the afterlife. This text would become one of the most important religious works in Egyptian culture, offering a glimpse into the Egyptian belief system. While the pharaoh remained at the top of the social hierarchy, the Middle Kingdom also saw a rise in the status of non-royal officials, priests, and soldiers. The growing bureaucracy of Egypt required skilled administrators, and many individuals from different social classes rose to positions of power. The Middle Kingdom was, in many ways, a time of increased social mobility, with the ability to achieve success through service to the state. Trade continued to flourish during the Middle Kingdom, bringing new goods and ideas into Egypt from across the ancient world. Egypt had strong trade relations with neighboring regions such as the Levant, Nubia, and Mesopotamia, exchanging grain, linen, and papyrus for luxury items, timber, and precious metals. The decline of the Middle Kingdom, the Second Intermediate Period. Despite the achievements of the Middle Kingdom, this period too eventually came to an end. After the reign of Amenemhat II, the Middle Kingdom began to decline, eventually giving way to the Second Intermediate Period around 1650 BCE. The cause of this decline is thought to be a combination of factors, including invasions by foreign peoples, internal political instability, and the weakening of the centralized government. During the Second Intermediate Period, Egypt was divided, and the Hyksos, a group of foreign rulers, took control of Lower Egypt. The Hyksos ruled for a time, but their presence in Egypt would eventually lead to a resurgence of native Egyptian power, as we will explore in the next section. Spanning from around 1550 BCE to 1070 BCE, the New Kingdom is often referred to as Egypt's Empire period. This was an age of military might, territorial expansion, and monumental construction. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom didn't just rule Egypt. They built an empire that stretched across the ancient Near East, including parts of Nubia, Syria, and Palestine. It was during this time that Egypt reached the height of its power, wealth, and cultural influence. The rise of the New Kingdom, Amos I, and the expulsion of the Hyksos. The New Kingdom began with the expulsion of the Hyksos, the foreign rulers who had controlled Lower Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. Amos I, the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, led a successful military campaign to drive the Hyksos out of Egypt around 1550 BCE. This victory marked the end of the Second Intermediate Period and the beginning of a new era of Egyptian dominance. Amos I's victory over the Hyksos was not just a military triumph. It was also symbolic of Egypt's return to its rightful place as a powerful and unified state. Under his leadership, Egypt began to strengthen its borders, solidify its internal administration, and rebuild its military. The success of Amos I set the stage for the pharaohs who would follow him, rulers who would expand Egypt's power far beyond its borders. The height of empire, the reign of Thutmose III, and the expansion of Egypt. Perhaps the most famous and successful military pharaoh of the New Kingdom was Thutmose III, who reigned from 1479 BCE to 1425 BCE. Known as the Napoleon of Egypt, Thutmose III led over 17 military campaigns into the Levant and Nubia, securing Egypt's dominance over vast territories. Thutmose III's reign is considered one of the greatest in Egyptian history, as he expanded Egypt's empire to its greatest territorial extent. Under his leadership, Egypt controlled parts of modern-day Syria, Palestine, and Sudan, as well as all the way to the Euphrates River. His military prowess ensured Egypt's position as a dominant power in the ancient world. One of Thutmose III's most famous battles was the Battle of Megiddo, fought in 1457 BCE, where he decisively defeated a coalition of Canaanite city-states. This victory opened up the entire Levant to Egyptian influence, and it was celebrated in inscriptions and monuments throughout Egypt. Thutmose III's military campaigns were not just about conquest. They were also about securing Egypt's trade routes and ensuring the flow of wealth into the kingdom. The spoils of war brought immense riches, and Egypt's economy flourished as a result. The reign of Hatshepsut, Egypt's female pharaoh. While Thutmose III's military successes are legendary, another ruler of the New Kingdom is remembered for her diplomatic acumen and monumental building projects. Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's few female pharaohs. Hatshepsut, who ruled from 1479 BCE to 1458 BCE, was initially a regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, but eventually declared herself pharaoh. During her reign, she was able to stabilize Egypt and focus on internal development. Hatshepsut is best known for her incredible architectural achievements, particularly the construction of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which remains one of Egypt's most awe-inspiring structures. In addition to her architectural legacy, Hatshepsut is remembered for expanding Egypt's trade networks. Perhaps the most famous of her diplomatic ventures was her expedition to the land of Punt, modern-day Somalia, which brought back exotic goods such as incense, myrrh, and gold. This trade initiative helped to increase Egypt's wealth and its influence in the ancient world. Despite her accomplishments, Hatshepsut's reign was followed by a period of erasure. After her death, Thutmose III sought to diminish her legacy, removing her name and image from monuments, though her contributions would eventually be rediscovered and celebrated by later generations. The Age of Akhenaten and the Religious Revolution. While the New Kingdom was characterized by military might and territorial expansion, it was also a period of religious and cultural upheaval. This is most evident during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled from around 1353 BCE to 1336 BCE. Akhenaten is best known for his radical religious reforms, which sought to shift Egypt's traditional polytheistic beliefs toward the worship of a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. Akhenaten's religious revolution was a dramatic departure from Egypt's long-standing worship of the gods, particularly Ammonius-Ra, the supreme deity. Akhenaten even moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to a new city, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, to further distance himself from the traditional religious practices. Akhenaten's religious experiment, however, was short-lived. After his death, his successor, Tutankhamun, quickly restored the traditional religious practices, and the city of Akhetaten was abandoned. Nevertheless, Akhenaten's reign remains one of the most unique and controversial chapters in Egyptian history. The reign of Ramses II, the height of Egypt's power. The New Kingdom reached its zenith under the rule of Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, who reigned from 1279 BCE to 1213 BCE. Often regarded as Egypt's greatest pharaoh, Ramses II oversaw a period of military conquests, monumental construction projects, and cultural flourishing. One of Ramses II's most famous military campaigns was the Battle of Kadesh, fought against the Hittites around 1274 BCE. While the battle was ultimately inconclusive, Ramses II claimed a great victory and immortalized the event in his temples and monuments, portraying himself as a heroic and invincible ruler. The aftermath of the battle led to one of the world's first known peace treaties, solidifying Ramses II's diplomatic prowess. Ramses II also oversaw the construction of some of Egypt's most iconic monuments, including the temples at Abu Simbel, which were carved into the side of a mountain to honor the gods and celebrate his own divine power. These temples stand today as a testament to his monumental vision and enduring legacy. Under Ramses II, Egypt was at the height of its power and influence, controlling vast territories and enjoying unprecedented prosperity. The decline of the New Kingdom. Despite the successes of Ramses II and his successors, the New Kingdom began to decline after his death. Successive pharaohs faced increasing pressures from internal strife, economic instability, and external invasions. Egypt's empire began to fragment, and the once great civilization entered a period of decline. which eventually led to its conquest by foreign powers, including the Libyans, Nubians, and Persians. By 1070 BCE, Egypt was no longer the dominant power it once was. The new kingdom had come to an end, but its legacy would endure for millennia, influencing the cultures that followed. As we conclude our journey through the entire history of ancient Egypt, we've witnessed the rise and fall of one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. From the pyramids of the Old Kingdom to the military conquests of the New Kingdom, Egypt's story is one of triumph, creativity, and resilience. Though the civilization ultimately faded from power, Egypt's cultural, architectural, and religious legacy continues to inspire awe and wonder across the world. The monuments of the pharaohs, the tombs of the kings, and the art that has survived through the ages remind us of a time when Egypt was the heart of the ancient world. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through time. Egypt's story is one that will never be forgotten, and its influence continues to resonate today, thousands of years after the reign of its greatest pharaohs.